AJ Mahari is a counselor and trauma recovery coach who has 30 years' experience working with people in codependency recovery, family of origin work, inner child healing, and self-differentiation.
Do you think it's accurate or meaningful to hear anyone say, well, BPD and codependency, equals the perfect storm? Because what is the perfect storm? And what does that mean? And then the idea that it's the person with codependency, who's going to give so much to the person with BPD because there's an element of reality inside of this, but because you're trying to help them, you're trying to get heard, trying to be seen, you are trying as a codependent, unbeknownst to you, often and unconsciously, you are trying to repair something from your childhood. Codependency is a formidable woundedness from childhood. So you get in these repetition compulsion cycles of giving and doing and trying to take care and rescue and fix because that's what happened in your childhood to one degree or another, one way or another. And you were taught in childhood by circumstances or poor parenting or just maybe because your parents didn't know any better, but they weren't horrible parents. You were taught that to be seen or heard or to try to get your needs met, you had to meet a parent's needs. Parentification, maybe like all kinds of difficulties in family of origin. So to say that people with codependency are essentially, I've heard this elsewhere, people say people with codependency are just trying to really help the person with BPD, which is true, but that's more a conscious sort of thing, which it isn't. Because and then I've heard it say, well, people with BPD, they're going to tend to pick out the flaws in you. And this kind of way of putting it, as I was listening to it, I don't know, a couple weeks ago somewhere, it was interesting because it was negating a lot about why people with BPD do what they do and what's really happening for them. Like, what do they really understand and know consciously versus what they don't, which doesn't excuse their behavior. And then people with codependency, why have you been doing what you're doing? And after the BPD relationship breakup, that agony and that, so BPD plus codependency, like codependence and people with BPD together, create the perfect storm of what? Well, it's a perfect storm of false hope, perfect storm of the person with BPD being codependent as well, and the codependent being codependent, and neither of you really seeing each other. Because a lot of people with codependency will see the person with borderline personality disorder and be like, okay, this is okay. They do this, they do that, but I don't know why, or even if you learn more about it, it still doesn't make any sense, right? Because it hurts and it's illogical. And so the way that I've heard this explained elsewhere from time to time, I've read a couple of things here and there, where it makes it sound like the person with BPD is doing, what they're doing consciously. Their fear of abandonment drives and motivates their maladaptive protective defense mechanisms, but they're not doing, usually, in this regard, the relational impossibility between the borderline with codependency and the person with codependency without BPD. It's not so much like a tit-for-tat situation, right? It's what people with BPD are going through that they're often not consciously aware of, and it's what people with codependency are going through that they're not consciously aware of. And yes, what does it create? It creates incredible false hope. But you don't experience it if you have codependency like it's false hope. You experience it like there's real hope. And the thing is, if somebody is untreated with BPD, or if they haven't even been diagnosed, so they can't be treated, and treatment takes so long, the reality there is that people with codependency, well, everything you're trying to do to help that person that you feel strongly that you love and they, who they were in the beginning was great, but then what's being pulled out of you, what you're responsible for to find out, and a lot of people don't realize this yet, depends where you are, is that you have your own responsibility to realize, to get into therapy. I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you, to get into your own healing and recovery process to understand, why do you keep giving? Why do you keep loving and feeling so strongly for somebody who can't love you, doesn't see you, doesn't hear you? Why is there that enmeshment between a codependent and a person with BPD? People with BPD are not really picking out your flaws. It may seem like it because they're going to come at you with every little thing because they're relational impossibilities, and they don't know how to communicate. And because of what happens, and the core reasons why people end up diagnosed with having borderline personality disorder, what it really means at its core, among all the other, woundedness and what that it means, is that these people don't know how to repair. So, like if you talk to a friend, or if you've had a partner, or dated someone in the past where they were just not personality disordered, right? They didn't have all these issues that people with BPD do. Then you can sit down, you can say to a partner, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a friend, a family member, you can say, hey, listen, like this happened, whatever the situation, and when this happened, I felt like this, and I just wanted to know, what was happening for you. Like those kind of conversations where people try to check things out with each other. You can't do that with people with untreated borderline personality disorder because they don't know how. Because they didn't experience it in childhood, or even if a parent was trying to repair something, they were already in this wounded place of not being able to take that in. So, again, codependency is something that isn't called a personality disorder because it overlaps, as the APA said, this was a reasoning for not including it in DSM in 1986 when it was proposed. They said that codependency overlaps BPD and overlaps dependent personality in cluster C. And there's a lot more going on with what is codependency and the depth of that most painful reality in people's lives. So the key thing I want you to take away from this, or I hope that you can hear, is that people with BPD are relating to you like you are, in idealization, the object of their good parent that they might have never had, and in devaluation, when they have a fear of abandonment or fear of being close, right? The approach avoidance conflict kicks in. They don't understand what's happening. They just have all these feelings that they don't know what to do with and don't understand. Then they're going to do the push-pull. And when they do the push, it's pretty painful for you. And then they pull you back in and you think, oh, good, it's going to work out and everything. And then they push you back out again. This can happen many, many times within a relationship, or it can cause an on-off, recycling situation in relationships. But what you need to know as a codependent is that people with untreated BPD, you can't make them go to therapy to change their relationship. You need your own healing and recovery process. And if they're not wanting to seek treatment, which unfortunately is probably a majority of people with BPD today, not that lots of people don't seek treatment, people can heal and recover. But what you have to do is you have to deal with, and you have to, it's helpful to get help to understand what's really the dynamic that's happening. What is that perfect storm that isn't really what creates the false hope? Because again, how I've heard this put before, it's like, well, the person with BPD is going to pick out your flaws. No, they don't even see you or hear you enough to pick out your flaws. But they are going to project on you things from their past, from a wounding parent in devaluation. And then they are going to seemingly be telling you, oh, well, you did this and you're like that. Or they might say, oh, you're a narcissist, when it has no truth whatsoever. Because they're not seeing you any more in devaluation than they do in idealization. So codependency people with codependency in relationship with people with borderline personality disorder, or the traits and patterns of who haven't been diagnosed, is going to be a recipe for a lot of pain. Because for both people in the relationship, the person with BPD in certain different way and to a more profound and deeper level, and the person with codependency, it's living out repetition compulsion cycles of what you think love is, or what the borderline might think love is, which isn't what healthy love is about at all. So it's like this unconscious setup that neither party realizes in the beginning of these relationships. And then a lot of people with codependency end up really fighting hard, when you've been pushed away or you've been ghosted and you want that person back. And what people don't understand is, that a lot of people with BPD, they don't understand why they're feeling what they feel. They don't understand their reactions. But it is in the middle of all this, the fact that people with codependency feel like the only way you're really going to be loved, and this happened in your childhood, that your needs can be met, that you're going to be seen and heard and loved, is to please and give and overachieve and do for someone else. And people with BPD don't know how to take in the positive. So the more you give, the more you care, the more you try to help them out. You try to make everything easier for them. They don't trust that, and they tend to punish you for that. So BPD and codependency equaling a storm. It's not like the person with BPD is really picking on you, but it is personalized to you. But they're reliving their adverse childhood experience, and you become the object of the representation of a parent. And for people with codependency, there's a similar way that works, but it doesn't mean you have borderline personality disorder. But you are also unconsciously seeking in these relationships. In a relationship with someone with BPD, you are seeking to also heal something from your past that you are likely not consciously aware of. So you'll keep overgiving and you'll keep trying to fix and rescue to get what you deserve, to have your needs met, to feel loved, to feel important, to feel seen and heard. But the bottom line is, between people with BPD projecting a lot of stuff out onto you that has nothing to do with you, but it hurts because they're saying it as if you're like, you did this and you did that. And you're like, I didn't do that. I don't understand. So the bottom line is the perfect storm between a codependent and an untreated borderline, or unless until they're really significantly treated, then people with codependency need their own healing and recovery journey. That perfect storm is the fact that both parties in different ways are thinking somehow love is worth fighting for. And it creates a sense of false hope, especially in the relationships, because not all people with BPD are the same, where the person with BPD may have some transient awareness and tells you, gee, I'm sorry this happened or that happened, but not in a very specific way. So again, it's the communication impossibility, the profound core woundedness, primal core woundedness in people with BPD, and then what is really adverse experience and woundedness in those with codependency, but not at such an early primal stage like of life. It can often be like year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, into your teen years, where people with codependency can be really wounded and hurt by parents or a family system in many ways that people don't realize. So the key thing is to get yourself into a healing recovery process. And if I resonate with you, I'm out here to work with you. And to understand and realize also, really sad but true, that more people than not with borderline personality disorder are not going to go and seek treatment. And many of them are drowning in trying to escape all the dysregulated emotions that they feel with substances or alcohol, and all that does is create more denial and roadblocks to them being able to get into treatment. So you have to sort of look at it in a way that is going to be painful to try to understand why you keep giving to somebody who keeps taking. But that perfect storm reality is not that you trigger the borderline and it's your fault if you're codependent. And it's not that the borderline is doing something to you in a way that is all their fault either. It's a mix of a very unhealthy relationship, these dynamics, wherein there's no way for either. People with BPD don't feel seen and heard, even though they could go on at you for like in a Jade conversation, right? Justify, argue, defend, explain for hours. They still don't feel seen or heard. And people with codependency, so what it is people with codependency and people with BPD cannot repair in a relationship what each has suffered in childhood, family of origin, the woundedness, and then not learned enough about self first and a healthy relationship to self. People with BPD have a lost self. People with codependency have a wounded part of self and some integrative work to do in healing and recovery. You're just constantly, people with BPD don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They can't be consistent. And people with codependency are on the other end of that, thinking somehow they can make it better. But there's no communication skills in between that can bridge the gap between somebody with BPD or even NPD and a codependent. There's no repair. So even when you think something's happened or there's been some kind of a talk or an argument and you think you've gotten somewhere because you think that the person with BPD heard you. No, it's going to come around again and again and again because repetition compulsion cycles of reenacting out early childhood woundedness for those with BPD takes years and years of therapy for that to stop because they're not consciously aware of it. People with codependency in a different way, not to the same extent, are also reenacting repetition compulsion cycles. It's how both in different ways need to be seen and heard and are looking for the reparation of the woundedness that happened in childhood. And the only way to repair that, whether you have BPD or codependency, is through therapy. Can't do it in relationships. And couples counseling is not a good idea because, in the 32 years I've been working with clients, I've heard some really horror stories about what happens. Because if you have, a person with BPD or even somebody with BPD, NPD, or NPD, and they don't have treatment, then again, it's what's at the core of all this, right? On both sides, but differently, is there's going to be no way to have a consistent, congruent with the person with BPD, consistent, congruent, problem solving way to repair any of the millions of things that happen in these relationships that break, that hurt, and that break the communication, break the quote love unquote, break the fact that like the quote bond, which is really an adverse bond, unhealthy bond. It's not really the bond that people with BPD or codependency think that it is. So the perfect storm aspect of a person with borderline personality disorder who has codependency as well, and the person with codependency who doesn't have borderline personality disorder, is not that they make it impossible for you, though they do in a way, right? But they're making it impossible for themselves, and they don't know why that's going on. So, and the person with codependency. So it's really about the person with BPD trying to get into treatment and gain some self-awareness to be able to be helped. And it's really about a codependent getting into their own healing recovery journey to also understand what's going on. So family of origin work, self-differentiation, individuation, learning where these patterns of codependent repetition and compulsion cycles come from inside of you and your childhood, because there is no way to repair or communicate with people with BPD or NPD who are lacking self and who are living through, in BPD, a false self, and in NPD, an even more formidable false self. These are relational impossibilities, but I think it's key to realize that it feels like the person with BPD is doing so many things to you, and they probably definitely are hurting you. And then you're trying to help them, but the more you try to help, the more you try to love, the more you care, the more consistent you are, the more that they're just going to go back and forth, people with BPD, with the approach avoidance conflict. Maybe what gets created more for people with codependency in these unhealthy bonds is that false hope. And the false hope doesn't always have to be something that comes from a person with BPD sort of seemingly getting something at a moment that they really don't get, or getting past, one of the approach avoidance conflict push pulls, whether they rage or whether they go silent, give you the silent treatment. These relationships simply cannot work because there's no, and on both sides in different ways, not enough communication to repair, because even people with codependency to varying degrees have a lot of work to do in their healing and recovery processes to actually adult emotionally. You may well be a codependent. You may be so successful in your life, with friends, with, in your business, or in the career you have, but it's what's in the emotional landscape that people have to get in touch with in a therapeutic process of their own healing and recovery journeys. So to say that people with BPD and people with codependency, it's the perfect storm, well, the perfect storm really encompasses within it the impossibility of relating, because neither person is being seen or heard. The borderline will never feel seen or heard because they're waiting for that from a parent that didn't give it to them, or they feel didn't give it to them. And people with codependency, you've kind of learned that, in your childhood, whatever happened in your childhood, and it's very different for lots of people with codependency, that repair to be seen and heard and get your needs met, you might have chased that a lot in your childhood, and you may have experienced it somewhat, that you got seen and heard, or that something felt better, or you may never really have had that experience. So people with BPD who can't take accountability and personal responsibility need to be able to go to therapy to learn how to do that. But if they're not doing that, then we have people with codependency who can be very responsible or even over responsible, but who often don't understand the genesis from your childhood of why you're crossing those wires of like the more you have to fight for love, the harder this is, the more you love that person. This is not healthy, and it's not healthy attachment. And people with BPD have a disorganized attachment style, which really means they can't attach at all. And they really don't know how to love. And the biggest thing about this is there's no ability to communicate with somebody with BPD, and many people with codependency have their own issues with this as well. There's no repair there. You can't repair anything. And if you do repair something, it's only going to break again because people with BPD have that inconsistency and that lack of self. So I hope that was helpful. And there's much more to say about this, as always. But just know that if you're still having hope and you're in an on and off situation, or you're trying to survive the BPD relationship breakup, and you have codependency and you're trying to do it on your own, you really need to get into a process to be helped to understand what's the genesis of your codependency from your family of origin, and to do the work that will help you to heal that, to become an independent person emotionally, so that you can go forward and have healthier relationships. Firstly and foremostly, a healthy relationship with and to yourself, and then a healthier relationship with another person after you've done your healing and recovery work.